Mercedes F1 has launched its new 2026 F1 car, the W17, and immediately it sent it out on track at a predictably soggy Silverstone Circuit, giving us the chance to get a first few impressions of the design. And this video is exactly that. A few first impressions of the car and my notes from looking at the 4 pictures and the tiny bit of video footage that the team has released so far. Actually, 5 pictures. Notably, there are no really good images of the back of the car, and that's deliberate from the team. The nose of the car is quite blunt and squared off and possibly a bit higher than seen on some other designs. The supports here are neatly twisted as well. The active Aerodynamics wing adjustment actuator is mounted on the center line of the car underneath the nose structure, and it looks quite small. So, I wonder if the actual actuator and the related gubbins are actually housed in the nose structure itself. And there's just a linkage down to the wing. We'll have to get a closer look at that in the sessions to come. It seems though that some teams will still opt to use twin actuators on the front wing like Racing Bulls has shown here in a render. I'm still getting used to these triple element front wings, but I do think that they look really quite interesting and really quite good as well. The end plates are clearly going to be an ongoing source of interest this season. Mercedes has opted to not fit the upper elements seen on the show cars and also seen on the Cadillac design, and it's an approach seen on a few other cars as well to not have those elements. The small element protruding next to the eye of the IWC is the tire sensor and has nothing to do with those aerodynamic parts seen on the show cars. There's a single vertical element on the footplate. Clearly, we're going to see a lot of design and experimentation in this part of the car. We've seen a few ideas on display already. It's really interesting to see how the leading edge of the footplate flares upwards. The curved section here seen on most cars reminds me a lot of the curved footplates on LMP1 cars like the Eureka 01. As you can see here, the car has push rod torsion bar suspension front and rear, and notably, some teams have opted for pull rod layout, so there's still really no consensus of engineering about the right way to go in terms of the suspension configuration on a 2026 Formula One car. The front brake ducts on the Mercedes have really caught my eye. Or rather, the lack of proper front brake ducts as we're used to seeing. At Silverstone, the car lacked any inboard air scoops and simply relied on the gap between the tire and the inner plate to feed the brake discs, pads, and calipers with cooling air flow, and it's a very different design to anything seen before. Previous big sort of designs like this that feed a lot of air between the tire and the inner plate also usually had an air scoop further back, but this car apparently doesn't. The shape of the air outlet, however, is very clear to see in these images. The roll hoop is really quite conventional and seems to follow the general shape and style of most recent Mercedes designs, with the central section of the A of the rollover structure feeding the engine and the ducts on the outer segments feeding cooling air to various underneath the bodywork to various ends and the bodywork of the rear of the car. Though perhaps the engine cover behind it is maybe a bit more chunky than previous designs, but it's a bit hard to tell from the available angles. The mirror housings on the W7 are also quite interesting, not only because they now accommodate the now mandatory new rain lights, but also the sculpting on the inner edge of the housing is also quite neat. Mirrors on a modern F1 car are not just about looking behind you. They also have a key aerodynamic role to play. It's just people don't tend to talk about it. Regular viewers on this channel will know that I quite like talking about rear view mirror design. The side pod inlets on the car are quite small and have a roughly triangular shape, but there's no sign of the zero pod concept. Unsurprisingly, The sidepod shape in general is quite interesting, with quite a big undercut and the upper section sweeping downward towards the rear of the car. It will be interesting to see this design from a few more angles. The rollout videos, though, show quite a lot of interesting sculpting on the upper section. In this picture taken from inside the garage, you can see some of that, with a dished section vaguely similar in concept to the Ferrari drag-reducing scallops introduced in 2022. There's also a nice glimpse of the edge of the diffuser and the rear brake cake tin. There's a huge amount of speculation about the size and design of the rear brakes on this year's cars, but it's not really possible to see what Mercedes has opted for in this shot, because the cake tin, that carbon fiber surround the brake disc, is fitted. There is, though, some nice sculpting on the upper wishbone just visible here, and you can just make out the rear brake duct cooling exits. The floor of the car is extremely interesting, and it's already been commented on by some others, but the serrated vertical section behind the front wheels looks really quite aggressive, and there's some interesting cutouts on the floor edge. In fact, if you were racing wheel-to heel with the W17, you perhaps wouldn't want your tire to bump into this specific bit of the floor. The holes at the rear of the floor ahead of the rear wheels have been generating quite a lot of discussion online, but I did think that I saw something quite similar on another shakedown spec car. But before I go into that, I'll just have to wait and see some better imagery of that. This region of the floor is really quite important, because using airflow in this area to prevent what is sometimes called tire squirt, the vortex from the base of the rotating rear wheels from entering the diffuser volume, is really quite important. Get it right and you can see a significant increase in rear downforce. The W17 does appear to be running quite a reasonable amount of rake, with the leading edge of the floor very close to the ground, while the rear ride height is significantly higher. Though the very limited imagery of the rollout and the weather conditions mean it isn't really ideal in this respect to judge just how much rake there truly is. I think that there's really an awful lot more to learn about the W17 as we get to see more of it, and there will be a detailed look at it coming up on F1 TV, I'm sure. But these are just my initial notes on what appears to be a really interesting new design. Actually, they're all really interesting new designs this year, so the more that you look at them, the more you start to see. So, I'm just really excited to see all of these new cars. If you've enjoyed this quick look at the new Mercedes, then please hit like and subscribe, as I'll try to make one of these first impressions videos for each of the new cars as they appear. Just as a note though, I don't use renders in these designs because they're generally nonsense. For now though, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon somewhere in the pit lane.